are here today. It is Saturday morning, and I am going to enjoy spending this hour with you today. So, what we're going to do is we're going to open our time with a word of prayer, and then we're going to spend some time talking about the events of the week and also how we can respond to them. Father, thank you today for this day, and thank you for that which we're going to be talking about today. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Well, if you live in the nation of Canada, you know that we had a federal election here in our country. And the prime minister before the election was Mark Carney. And Mark Carney was again elected with his party, the Liberal Party. And they are now the governing party. They do not have a majority. So that means that Mark Carney has to work cooperatively with, of course, the opposition parties to accomplish what it is that he wants to accomplish. Now, it's going to be a real challenge because one of the questions that he was asked was he going to once again rely on the NDP? If you are a follower of Canadian politics, you know that the previous prime minister, whose name was Justin Trudeau, back in the early part of 2022-21, went into a coalition with the NDP, who was led by a now no longer a leader in the NDP, Judd McSeen, and they went into what they call a supply agreement. And that meant that as long as Justin Trudeau and, of course, the Liberal government agreed with the policies of the NDP, that the NDP would prop them up. And it was very much to the detriment of Judd McSeen and also the NDP to enter into that coalition, because that meant that many of the social projects of both the NDP and also as well the Liberals were presented to Canadians. Now, you have to understand something about Canadians. We're very much like the people of the United States in one regards. Most of us are called centrists. That means that we're someplace in the middle. That doesn't mean that we go to the extreme right or we go to the extreme left. We're kind of in the middle. Canada, for example, is what we would call a social democracy. When I talk about a social democracy, we believe in social justice. So we have, for example, universal health care. Now, that is not a cheap situation. It actually costs a lot of money. But what it does mean is if you are a citizen of Canada, or even someone who is what we would call a permanent resident, that means that you get universal health care. Let me explain. My daughter-in-law, her name is, of course, Annalisa. She came to the country of Canada back in 2013. And she met my son, Robert, who is, of course, they met in 2014 or late 2013, and they fell in love, and they got married. Now, for the first little while, Annalisa couldn't get, of course, universal health care. So Robert had to, of course, supply that. But as time progressed, she became a permanent resident. And as soon as she became a permanent resident, that meant that my granddaughter, Melissa, who came over from the Philippines and became my son's daughter, and his daughter, Sarah, who was born here, they all now have universal health care. That means that as a permanent resident or a citizen of Canada, you get universal health care. It also means that under the present government, you also can apply for dental coverage as well. That is, of course, supplied by the federal government. Also, as well, in Canada, we have $10 a day daycare. They modified it to $15 a day. The simple fact is that we have these universal health, and as well, we have old age security. Now, they have the same old age security thought in the States, but for example, in the States, they don't have universal health care for every single person. And so there are some different policies. Also, as well, Canadians have a tendency to be very strong on social action. So we have, for example, a couple of weeks ago, in the radio station that I happen to be involved with, which is AM 930 The Light, we did a radiothon for Hope Mission. Now, Hope Mission happens to be a Christian organization that works with the vulnerable in the province of Alberta. They have outlets in Edmonton, one in Wetaskiwin, one in Red Deer, and then also as well in the city of Calgary. Now, you have to understand, Alberta is basically, we have a large rural population, but the majority of our population is in our two largest cities. Our two largest cities are the city of Calgary, which is almost 2 million people, and the city of Edmonton, which is also 2 million people. So there are 5 million people that live in this province, but in the two major cities, you have 4 million people. Okay, so basically in our province, of course, we have certain ideas and things that we do as a province. And of course, part of that is the fact that we are very strong on social programs. And so when it came to Hope Mission, we were able to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to help the vulnerable in our major cities. So that was a very positive thing. And I'm grateful for the generosity, of course, of all Albertans in helping the vulnerable. That is a core value of this nation. Now, this last week, of course, one of the bedrocks of our democracy is the fact of a free election. Anyone who is 18 years old can vote in the Canadian election as long as they are registered. And so many people voted. In fact, the largest amount of Canadians voted at any time in history. Now, on the backdrop of the Canadian election, of course, was the economic adversary being President Trump. And Mr. Trump has been touting the fact that he's going to use economic measures and also as well political measures to, of course, annex and to take control of Canadian natural resources. Now, of course, Canada is well known around the world for its resources. For example, my province of Alberta sits on the third largest oil deposits in the world. Canada has 90% of the potash or fertilizer and potash that is needed on farms in the world. In fact, the province of Saskatchewan has the largest deposit, but the second largest deposit and the biggest natural deposit ever found when it comes to potash was actually found in the province of Manitoba. And according to what they're telling us, there's enough potash there to supply the world with potash for the next 400 years. So we've got an abundance, of course, of potash. We have an abundance of oil. We also have, get this, Canada has 25% of the world's natural fresh water. Okay, we have huge lakes here. We have the Great Lakes. Okay, Canada borders on with the United States with the largest lake system in the world, that being, of course, Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and also as well, the other lakes that are involved. Canada also has in the Northwest Territories two huge bodies of water, the Great Slave Lake and the Great Bear Lake. We have in Canada the second largest um, river when it comes to, of course, volume of water. The only other river in the world, which happens to be the second longest river in the world, which is the Amazon, but we have the Mackenzie River. And the Mackenzie River is totally navigable from, of course, the Great Slave Lake right through until, of course, it empties into the Arctic Ocean. So Canada has all of that. Also, as well, Canada has some of the largest rivers in the world. That being, of course, the rivers that are with the Rocky Mountains. And we have the majority of the Rocky Mountains as well. So these are things that Canada has in its favors. We also have vast resources in minerals and hydroelectric power, et cetera, et cetera. So, and the interesting thing is Canada only has 41 million people. And 90% of Canadians live within 200 miles of the American border. So the majority of our country, for example, is sparsely populated. We have actually three large territories that cover basically 1/3 of the entire country. And in the province of, or I should say, the Yukon Territory, you have just a little over 60,000 people. In the Northwest Territories, you have about 60,000 people. And in Nunavut, you have about 40,000 people. So you're talking in the North around 200,000 people, which is, of course, a medium-sized small city, is what it is. So we have all this vast resources, but not that many people. When you look at 41 million people, and Canada is almost 4 million square miles, that means that basically you have one person for, or four people for every square mile. When you think about it, that Canada, for example, has about the same amount of people in the entire country as the state of California. So it just kind of brings you into perspective about the vast untapped resources of Canada. And this is part of the reason why we have some of the economic trouble that we have with the present administration in the States. Now, what that did, of course, was create a certain amount of nationalism. Because as soon as someone says to a country, we want to take you over, we want to make you the 51st state, well, Canadians don't want to be Americans. It's as simple as that. There may be a small minority that would say, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. But the reality of the situation is there's a lot of cherished social programs that we have that the United States doesn't have. And so we're also different in different likes and also as well the way that we think. And that's okay. So most of us would say, no, we don't want to be with the United States, especially with some of the problems that the United States has. For example, Canada does not have very much gun violence. You know, for example, in homicides across the entire country is less than a medium-sized city in the United States. Did you know that, for example, Chicago has about 30 to 40,000 murders every single year in the city? Now, think about that for a moment. There are 365 days in a year, and they have over 36,000 murders every year in Chicago alone. That means that basically, if you follow it, 100 people a day are losing their lives in Chicago. And that's just one city. Okay. Canada does not have anything like that. So why would we want to have that in Canada? And, you know, there are other cherished freedoms that we have that United States, you know, says they have, but we have basically we have a peaceful society. You can walk down the streets of any major Canadian city and you are fairly safe. I lived in the city of Edmonton, for example, for a number of years, and I could walk down, excuse me, down the street of any part of that city with relative safety. Yes, right, relative safety. It didn't matter if it was 95th Street, 118th Avenue. It didn't matter if I was walking through the middle of the city of Edmonton. I was safe and secure. Why? Because of the society in which we live. And even though, for example, in the city of Edmonton, there are 5,000 homeless people, it's relatively a safe city to come and visit. So that's the banner, and that's also the uniqueness of being in Canada. Now, what we did this last week, of course, is we elected a brand new government. It's actually not a brand new government. It's the same government that we've had for the last 10 years alone. Now, what they did do this time was they elected themselves a new party leader. And this party leader became the prime minister. And of course, Mark Carney was, of course, the governor of the Bank of Canada for a number of years. And then he was also the governor of the Bank of England for a number of years as well. He was part of the leadership team in 2008. Remember what they call the Great Recession of 2008, which devastated the majority of the world. But Canada, we stood strong because we had three very capable leaders. We had a capable leader in Prime Minister Stephen Harper. We had an excellent finance minister whose name was Jim Flaherty. We also had Mark Carney as our Bank of Canada governor. And between the three of them, they were able to stave off recession that hit the rest of the world. Canada actually came out of the recession better than any other country in the world. And then, of course, Mr. Carney was in charge of the Bank of England during Brexit. That's when, of course, Britain exited the European Union and all the chaos and confusion that it caused. Now, it wasn't an easy time for anybody, but now he steps into the mantle of Canadian Prime Minister, and next week, he is going to be meeting with President Trump. Now, that's going to be an interesting meeting. Someone actually asked him, "Are you concerned about visiting President Trump?" Because they were thinking of what was going on when it came to, of course, Mr. Trump back in the early part of the spring when he met with, of course, President Zelensky from the Ukraine. And him and J.D. Vance, who is the vice president, basically ganged up on President Zelensky. So it was interesting. They asked Mr. Carney the question, "Are you concerned about it?" He says, "No." He says, "We're going there prepared." He says, "We're going there with an agenda. We're going there." And, the one thing that they said about Mr. Carney is the fact that he was always the smartest guy in the room. So I guess we'll see what happens when it comes to his visit with President Trump, because everybody knows that Mr. Trump likes to try to intimidate people. He likes to try and overshadow people. We know that he is a promoter, and he likes to make deals. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the two of them, get along together. Mr. Carney is a thinker. Mr. Carney is a planner. Mr. Carney is, an economic PhD. So we're going to see what's going to happen. I thought it was interesting. I saw a Facebook post that says this, that Mr. Carney has a PhD in economics, and Claudia Sheinbein of the Mexico has a PhD in engineering. And so the president of the United States, of course, has none of those, but he's also managing the world's largest economy. And depending on who you talk to, he's either doing a fabulous job or he's not doing a fabulous job. But I know one thing is that Canada is sitting on the precipice of either economic disaster or economic opportunity. Now, as far as I'm concerned, Canada has probably the greatest potential to be able to shine in these uncertain times. But again, it depends on good leadership and also the fact that we, as the people of Canada, lift up, of course, our prime minister. And I'd like to do that right now. I'd like to spend a moment praying for my prime minister. I may not necessarily agree with his politics, but I do believe that the Canadian people have made a decision. I may not entirely agree with their decision because it was the Liberal Party that got us into all the trouble economically that we got into. Most people don't know this, but the two leaders in Canada that ran up deficits in the nation of Canada were the Trudeaus. The first one, of course, was Justin Trudeau's dad, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. He had the responsibility of leading Canada from 1969 to 1984. And during that time, when he took over leadership in Canada, Canada was running surpluses. Under his leadership, we accumulated half a billion, half a trillion dollars worth of debt. Okay, $500 billion worth of debt. Then, when his son Justin Trudeau came into power in 2015, he then added $800 billion worth of debt. Canada right now has a debt of $1.3 trillion. Now you say, well, that's not too bad considering the fact that the United States has $37 trillion, which is true. But, when you only have 41 million people, that is a tremendous debt burden. The average Canadian is actually in debt 187%. That means that for every dollar that we earn, our debt ratio is $1.87. That is pretty high when you think about it. I was having a conversation with my grandson, Gideon, who actually voted for the very first time. I also thought it was interesting that when I was chatting with my grandsons, that both of them had an opposite political view than I did. Now, of course, they are brand new. They are idealistic. And I would admit that even when I was their age, I thought the same way they did. The only difference is as you get older, you begin to see things a little more clearly. And so I said to them, I hope that Mr. Carney does very, very well. The Canadian people have made their decision. So, Father, I want to pray right now for Mark Carney. I want to lift him up to you right now. And I'm asking you, Lord, right now, I heard his speech yesterday, and it all sounds very good. It sounds like he's going to cooperate. He's going to cooperate with the other political parties. He, in fact, allowed Pierre Poilievre, who lost his seat in Ottawa. There was, in fact, in the riding where I currently live, the MP gave up his seat so that Pierre Poilievre could actually run in this area. Interesting enough, the opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, if he wins the by-election here in what we call Battle River, Crowfoot, he could actually be my MP and my political representative. Now, that would be very, very good. And I have to admit that I liked the way that Mr. Carney said. They said, are you going to allow a by-election in this particular riding for Mr. Poilievre? And I like what he had to say. So I can't disagree with that. The tone is the right tone. Now, whether or not he's going to follow through, past experience, at least with the Liberal leader of our last prime minister, this was a guy who could talk out of both sides of his mouth, and he would talk a great talk, but his follow through was wanting. I pray that Mark Carney will be a man of his word, that he would be a man who would walk with integrity, he would walk with accountability, he would walk with transparency, he would be a truthful individual, that he would be a man who walks with wisdom. This is the type of leadership that we need. And if that's the type of man that he is, then I am very, very excited. Now, of course, it's interesting that he actually grew up, this is Mark Carney, in the city or the community of Fort Smith. I have been to Fort Smith. I lived for 10 years in the Northwest Territories in both Yellowknife and Hay River. And of course, to get Fort Smith, you have to go through Hay River. So we're very familiar with, of course, Fort Smith. And then he grew up in Edmonton, which I have resided for a number of years. Now, recently, I've moved to a smaller town in the province of Alberta, but for a number of years, I lived in Edmonton. So he grew up in Edmonton. So the reality of the situation is Mark Carney is an Albertan. So we're trusting that some of the values of Alberta will be displayed in our present leadership. People in Alberta, for example, are people who believe in keeping their word. They are people who are strong-minded and independent. We are a province of entrepreneurs and also as well business people. So my prayer is that all that he grew up with will be exhibited in, of course, his leadership style. We've got to give him the benefit of the doubt. I guess over time, we will see what kind of leader he is. He certainly knows how to talk the talk. And I did like the fact that he did say that he was not going to delay having a by-election for Pierre Poilievre. That showed a lot of grace. And so we know that within the next few weeks, we're going to be having an election in the riding in which I reside. It would be very exciting to have as my MP the leader of the official opposition. And Pierre Poilievre has said that he is willing to work with Mark Carney on advancing the Canadian agenda. Lord, that's what we pray for. We are sitting on vast reserves of the nation. I grew up. This is so amazing to me. I know that when it came to residing, I literally won the lottery. I grew up in southern Alberta. I grew up on the shadow or in the shadow of the mighty Rocky Mountains. I spent my youth and my childhood in Banff and in Waterton and in the Kananaskis, which are considered the jewels and also the most beautiful spots in the world. I spent and have spent numerous days and weeks in Lake Louise. I have been at the Lake Louise, Chateau Lake Louise. I have been there on numerous occasions, staying in that magnificent hotel. So I'm blessed. I admit that. I'm blessed. I live in the nice nation of Canada. There are only 41 million people that live in this country. There are 8.2 billion people that live on this planet right now. And there are cities that are larger and have a bigger population, I should say, than my entire country. So I recognize the incredible blessing of living where I live. And I'm rejoicing over that. That's why I'm praying today for our leadership. That's why I'm more than willing to give Mark Carney the benefit of the doubt. The one thing that I do know is that you raise people up and you bring people down. You have raised up Mark Carney for a time such as this. Now, whether or not he is worthy of the responsibility that's been given. When I listened to that speech yesterday, he said it was his first real meeting with the press since he became the leader of Canada. And he said all the right things. So, my prayer is that he will follow through with what he said he was going to do. And I want to pray for him, especially when he meets with Donald Trump next Tuesday. He says he's getting prepared. I think he recognizes that going into, of course, Donald Trump, he doesn't really know what he's facing. I was watching an interview this last week about, of course, Bill Maher. Bill Maher, of course, is one of Donald Trump's fiercest critics. And Donald Trump invited him to a dinner, and they spent 2.5 hours together. And Bill Maher said that the Donald Trump that he met that night was not the Donald Trump that you see many times in his interviews where he is promoting himself. He said that that night, when it came to Bill Maher, he said, I saw a man who listened to what I had to say, didn't criticize what I had to say, and was very thoughtful. So Bill Maher was a little bit confused because what he sees going on in public is not necessarily what he sees going on in private. So I think that you might think that Donald Trump is paranoid or two personalities or multi-personality. We don't know. We do know this, that when it comes to what he wants to see happen, people may not necessarily agree. So my prayer for Mark Carney is that Mark Carney would walk into that meeting fully prepared and that he would know exactly how to negotiate with this man. Now, we do know that he had to oversee the separation of Britain with, of course, Europe, and all the economic and also as well the political ramifications. So we know that he is able to manage, of course, tricky situations. So I'm praying today that Mark Carney will have the wisdom to be able to, negotiate, talk, and also as well be able to navigate the unusual Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is unusual. He is different than any modern day president. And so, and you never know what you're dealing with. So we pray for Mark Carney during his meeting with Donald Trump. And I also want to pray for him that he has a very unique possibility. He's talking about changing the Canadian economy. He says we're planning to embark over the next 4 years a absolute transformation of the Canadian economy. He's talking about lowering, as of July 1st, trade barriers within the provinces. Now, Canada is a very unique place because we have 10 provinces and 3 territories. Each one of these particular governments are autonomous from, of course, the federal government. In 1982, for example, when the late Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau wanted to redo the Constitution. You see, when Canada was first instituted as a nation, we were basically under the British rule. And in 1867, we became an autonomous sovereign nation. But we still had a constitution that was literally based upon the British system. It was called the British North American Act. And in 1982, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was a lawyer, He wanted to bring a new constitution. He wanted to bring something that was uniquely Canadian. But he also knew that he had to work within the Confederation of Canada. That meant that he had to get together with provincial leaders, and those provincial leaders would have to hammer out a brand new constitution, and they had to agree on that constitution. You see, in Canada, the federal government has a certain amount of power, and then each province has jurisdiction over the province. For example, in my province of Alberta, our current leader is a lady named Danielle Smith. That means that whatever goes on in the province of Alberta, she has sole responsibility. That means, of course, when it comes to jurisdiction, when it comes to, of course, the responsibility over minerals and over oil or whatever it is that has to do, we have to, of course, work with the federal government. The federal government has a certain amount of jurisdiction, and the province has certain jurisdiction. And one of the things in our Constitution is the fact that before they can make any constitutional change, for example, 7 of the 10 provinces have to agree. Now, it was very interesting that Mr. Trudeau happened to be a very strong leader. And they were definitely worried. This is a very interesting part of Canadian history that I'm giving today in this prayer. And that was this. Back in the early 80s, Canada had 2 very strong, different visions of what Canada would look like. In 1976, for example, the province of Quebec had a referendum concerning sovereignty. Could they become a sovereign nation within Canada? It got really, really close. In fact, the vote was 49 to 51%. That means that 51% of Quebecers voted to stay in Canada. Now, it's obviously a lot less. In fact, they say only about 35% of Quebecers now today want to have separation. But that's interesting because there's an actual party in Canada, which is called the Bloc Québécois, and their agenda is actually separation. And they are elected federally into Canada. So right now, there's about 25 separatists that are working on behalf of Quebec, separating in the Canadian federal government. Isn't that unique? Anyway, the leader of that particular movement was a guy named René Lévesque, and he was quite concerned about the fact that the federal government would somehow try to override the provincial jurisdiction. So he, and also the province of Alberta, who was led by an incredible statesman. That fellow was, of course, Peter Lougheed. And Peter Lougheed was the province of Alberta's premier for basically 16 years. Both of these men were incredibly concerned about their constituents. Of course, the province of Alberta, entrepreneurial, very independent thinking, in some areas almost Americanized to a certain point. We have a large amount of Americans living in the province of Alberta because of the fact that the economic head of the gas and oil industry is in Calgary, Alberta. So we have lots of people from America living in Calgary. So under that guise, we had Peter Lougheed and René Lévesque coming together with Pierre-Elliott Trudeau, making the Constitution, and they put within that particular framework a legal clause called the notwithstanding clause. That means that a province could opt out of any federal legislation that they felt enacted on their jurisdiction and their sovereignty in that province. Now, the province of Quebec has actually used the notwithstanding clause over 30 times. Alberta has never used it, and Saskatchewan has only used it once. And what that means is that, for example, when it came to the province of Saskatchewan, They wanted to make sure that there was a certain social contract that was, the majority of Saskatchewanians agreed with. They said, we are going to put it into law and we are going to use the notwithstanding clause so that nobody can actually, they can't challenge it in court for 5 years. So that's what Saskatchewan did. Now, of course, when it comes to Quebec, they are very big on protecting the French language. And so they have used the notwithstanding clause over 30 times to strengthen the jurisdiction of French in, of course, the province of Quebec, especially when the majority of people who live in Quebec aren't actually French speaking. So it's very, very interesting what's going on in Canada. Now, Mr. Carney, he's got to navigate all this. He's got to be able to work with very strong, independent thinking leaders. Across Canada, we have a very interesting mosaic of political leaders in, for example, our provinces. The majority of our provinces are ruled by or led by conservative people who have, a conservative mentality. But we also have a couple of provinces that are led by socialists. So that has proven very interesting. One of the leaders is actually a fellow named Canoe, and he happens to be an NDP Indigenous leader. And he's a very good leader because he wants to actually work with Mark Carney. And they've met together on numerous times in the last few days. And they've talked about how that they want to, use the Arctic Ocean as a deep sea port. So they're talking about expanding the Hudson Bay port of course, Churchill, and turning it into a port that can be used about 4 to 6 months out of the year. So that's very interesting. And they're working with the province of Quebec to see if they can get maybe LNG or pipelines across the province. So it's going to be very interesting over the next little while. That's why I'm praying for Mark Carney, because he has a very unique opportunity to be able to bring this nation back together. Unfortunately, the previous 10 years has been more fractious than it has been what we would call unifying. So he's got an interesting challenge ahead of him because he's leading the party that caused all these problems. Now he has a chance to redeem his party and also to chart a new future. Now, I have to give credit where credit is due. After Pierre Elliott Trudeau bowed out back in 1984, the nation of Canada was led by a leader whose name was Brian Mulroney. Brian Mulroney led 2 successive majorities, conservative majorities. Then, at the end of his time, he resigned, and the new Liberal Party was led by a centrist whose name was Jean Chrétien. Jean Chrétien actually led the nation of Canada during the 90s until 2004. He basically led Canada for 11 years. Now, it was also interesting that during those years, he had a finance minister whose name was Paul Martin. And Paul Martin was famous because his family is the owner of some of the largest shipping lines in Canada. So we had a centralist who was basically working on behalf of working together with the provinces. And during those 11 years, we had good government. I fully agree that we had good government. The thing that really caught me was the fact that during those 11 years, Canada ran surpluses. Every single year, we were looking to billions of dollars in surpluses. And so during those years, that's what happened. And then, of course, after Chrétien left, Stephen Harper came our prime minister. And again, we had good government. It was only in the last 10 years that Canada politically and also socially, economically, educationally, did not have good government. Now, Mr. Carney has a chance to bring the Liberal Party away from its socialistic aspect in the last 10 years back to the center. That's going to be a challenge because, you know, he's got a lot of the same old crew. Now, whether or not he's going to be able to bring them into the center where most Canadians are. And that's why Canadians voted him in, because they said, we're going to give you another chance. So I'm praying today that he will have the wisdom to be able to maximize that and to use that as a platform and as a springboard into the future. That's what I'm praying for. So, Lord, I pray for him. I always pray this thing. Number one, that every political leader, whether they are national, provincial, or municipal, that they will walk with wisdom, integrity, transparency, accountability, honesty, and truthfulness. That's what I pray for. You see, it's easy to do the rhetoric. It's easy to do the propaganda. It's easy to project yourself as a moderate and as a leader. The proof in the pudding is how you act. You see, every one of us, we all believe that we must have people who follow through with what they say. It's easy to say you're going to do something. It's a lot tougher to actually do it. And that's what's been lacking in Canada. And that's what's lacking right now in the United States. We have had leadership who have been long on promise and short on delivery. So that's why I'm praying. I'm praying that Mr. Carney will be different. That's my hope. Whether or not it happens, I guess we're going to have to wait and see. The proof will be in the pudding. We will either have a brand new type of leadership or we're going to have the same old, same old. My prayer is that we will not get what we deserve, that we will get something new and something different. One of my favorite scriptures is, of course, Proverbs 14:34. And it simply says, righteousness exalts a nation, sin is a reproach to any people. Canada started off in a great way. I mean, in 1867, our Confederation fathers were getting together in the community of Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. That, of course, is of Anne of Green Gables fame. Now, when they were gathering together, they were trying to decide what kind of nation was Canada going to be. Now, they were dealing with a problem. United States was actually pressuring them to become, a different nation than what they had seen. They knew that the majority of people in Canada were British. So they didn't want Canada to become a kingdom. And they expressed that. We don't want you to become a kingdom. And we don't want you to become a republic because that makes you too much like us. And United States has always felt that they were special. And that's fine. They can feel that way. And so what happened, of course, is that one of our leaders was in his Bible one day and he was looking at it and he saw Psalm 72:8. And it said, he shall have dominion from sea to sea. So he comes into the Confederation table. He's talking to his fellow Confederation fathers. And he says, I think I found the answer to our problem. And he explained about the fact that they had been communicating with the United States and with Britain about this whole idea of becoming a sovereign nation. And he says, you have heard what the Americans want, and you've also heard what the British want. We can find a compromise. And they said, what's that? He said, and then he read them, Psalm 72:8. He shall have dominion from sea to sea. They said, that's it, that's the answer. And so Canada became known as the Dominion of Canada. It satisfied the United States, and it also satisfied the problem that UK was dealing with at the time, Great Britain as well. And so they said, yes, you are the Dominion of Canada. And let's make it our national verse. Let's make this the foundation of our nation, that he shall have dominion from sea to sea. Now, of course, Canada is bordered on 3 oceans. We are bordered on the Pacific Ocean to the west, the Atlantic Ocean on the east, and to the north, the Arctic Ocean. And so he shall have dominion from sea to sea to sea. And they liked it so much that when they put and were building Canada's new Parliament buildings, they put on what they call the Peace Tower, which is the watchtower in the central block of course, the Parliament buildings. They put the inscription, he shall have dominion from sea to sea. Now, until about the 1960s, that was, of course, what Canada was all about. We have slowly drifted away from that. Mr. Carney has the chance to make this nation again great. We can see the reversal of what we've been seeing on in our nation. This is our opportunity to not only become an economic superpower because of the fact that we have all these vast resources, but also as well to be a leader in the world when it comes to, of course, advancing peace and security. Canada, most people don't know this, but was actually the nation that started the whole peacekeeping movement within, of course, the UN. It was our leader, Lester B. Pearson, who went to the United Nations and said, I have a proposal. Let's have the United Nations, different nations, supply in very difficult areas a peacekeeping force. And he says, my nation of Canada is willing to, of course, do that. And Canadian armed forces have been the bulk of the majority of peacekeeping forces throughout the world. And Lester B. Pearson actually won the Nobel Peace Prize because of that proposal. Canada can do that again. That's my prayer. My prayer is that we will become the nation that we were all meant to be. Mr. Carney has that opportunity. And I pray that he will. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I've given you, excuse me, I got a little bit of cold today. I've given you a little bit of background about my nation of Canada. I've talked about the unique opportunity that we have. As Canadians, we are about as different as the United States as you can be. Yet we have also occupied the same border with them for a couple 100 years. And we've been at peace with our brothers to the south. It's just that it's sad that the current administration has forgotten that. Whenever the United States has asked us to be involved in something that they're involved with, we have done it without hesitation. When 9/11 happened, we were asked by the United States to come and partner with them in going to Afghanistan. We did. And we lost hundreds of service people and had also as well thousands injured in a war that wasn't even ours on. But we went because we were asked. So sometimes leaders forget that. And that's what's happened right now. The current leadership in the United States has forgotten that. I'm hoping that Mr. Carney can find a compromise for what's going on right now. It's going to be a challenge for him. It really is. So that's why I was praying for him. That's why I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. The reason I'm giving him benefit of the doubt is that he was born in the territories. I have been in the territories. He's a guy from Alberta and from the city of Edmonton. So it's entirely possible that his roots in Alberta and the fact that he is an economic PhD, maybe he will be able to navigate these days of tariffs and declining and also decimating Canadian relationships. It was Mark Carney who actually said our working relationship with the United States, the way that we've done things, is over. He said that back in March when he became the prime minister. Now we are in the month of May. He is now our new prime minister. And one of the things that he did say in his first interview with all the different journalists, he said, listen, I know that our relationship with the United States has changed. He said, I'm the one who declared that the current relationship that we have with the United States is over. He says, what I look forward to is forging a new relationship, a relationship that is mutually beneficial, but also as well, he says, I'm going there reminding Mr. Trump that we are a sovereign nation. And he said that several times in his speech. He said, we are a sovereign nation, a nation of people who are nation builders. He says, we are nice people, but he says, we're not going to be pushed around. So it's going to be very interesting how that all shakes out. So keep watching. And from time to time, I will talk about these things. I'm not a political animal. I don't really like talking about politics. And I do admit that I have a tendency towards be conservatism, but I'm also kind of in the middle. To a certain point, a socialist. I love social programs that work on behalf of others. That's why I'm involved, for example, in the different radiothons that I'm involved in. The last one being Hope Mission, because I really believe that we need to work hard on behalf of the vulnerable. There's a lot of folks out there who haven't got the blessings that I have. So, of course, I'm going to work very tirelessly to make sure that people get, a hand up. That's really important. And people have given me a hand up, and I've appreciated that. So, in turn, we need to do the same. So, I believe that we can be fiscally responsible. I believe that we can be generous, and I believe that we can help others. Canada can balance that out. They don't seem to get that in the United States, but we do. And so my prayer for Mark Carney is that he will be the prime minister that we hope he will be. He's got a big job. He's got to turn around public perception concerning the Liberal Party. And he's got to also navigate Mr. Trump and all that he brings to the table. As I said before, Bill Maher said, listen, he's not what he seems to be in public. And he made that very clear. He says, that's not the man I met. He says, I was expecting something and I was met by somebody different. So let's find out which persona Mr. Trump brings to the table when he meets with our leader, Mark Carney. It's going to be interesting. Well, anyway, that's my commentary for today, my prayer today as well. So again, if you like what you've been hearing and seeing, I always encourage you to press the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Of course, you are also aware of the fact that I do a lot of short little sayings. Check them out as well. Check out my shorts. That part. I don't want to say anymore because it has all kinds of implications. But anyway, check it out. And if you like what you're seeing, press the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. My name is Robert Dean Steele. Thanks for spending time with me on this Saturday morning.